A single sentence can dismantle an empire. In high-stakes corporate circles, power isn't just about balance sheets. It's about dominance. But on a rainy Tuesday evening at an upscale downtown restaurant, a prominent executive crossed a line from which there was no return. He thought he was playing a harmless game of psychological chess. Instead, he triggered a sequence of events that would destroy his career in less than 12 hours. The setting was a meticulously orchestrated corporate dinner. Every detail, from the crystal glassware to the quiet clinking of silver, was designed to project absolute control. In our world, these dinners are battlefields masked as social gatherings. Fake smiles, strategic laughter, people whispering pleasantries while calculating their next career move. I was sitting near the center of the table, trying to blend into the background. My wife, Alina, sat beside me. She has always possessed a rare kind of gravity, a quiet, effortless elegance that commands a room without demanding it. People notice her, not because she tries to be noticed, but because her composure makes it impossible to look away. At the head of the table sat Victor Hale. Victor was a man who believed the rules of polite society simply didn't apply to him. To Victor, human beings were assets to be acquired or obstacles to be removed. He had been drinking heavily that evening, his posture growing more aggressive with every glass of scotch. As the night wore on, his filter vanished entirely. That was when I noticed his eyes shifting. He wasn't looking at the financial reports or the senior partners. He was looking at Alina. It wasn't a glance of polite admiration. It was a predatory, lingering gaze that made my blood run cold. I felt a familiar, tight knot forming in my stomach. In corporate life, you learn to swallow your pride. You accept the subtle insults and the power plays because the alternative is professional suicide. So I stayed silent. I kept my hand flat on the table, convincing myself to let it go. But Victor wasn't planning on letting anything go. He leaned across the table, completely ignoring my presence. The space between us seemed to shrink. He smiled a crooked, alcohol-fueled smile, looking directly into my wife's eyes. "So, Alina," his voice cut through the background noise, "are you single?" The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Suddenly, the ambient chatter of 30 people dissolved into absolute, suffocating silence. No one moved. No one breathed. I could feel the pressure of every eye in the room shifting toward our end of the table. Think about the sheer calculation of that moment. A powerful superior asking your spouse if she is available while you sit less than 2 feet away. It wasn't just an insult. It was a public castration designed to show who really owned the room. Under the tablecloth, my fingernails dug so deeply into my palms that I thought they would break the skin. I looked at Alina. A terrible wave of anxiety washed over me. What if she tried to laugh it off? What if she played along just to protect my career? In our world, survival often means playing the diplomat. But Alina is not a diplomat. She slowly set her fork down on the porcelain plate. The sound was incredibly loud in the silent room. She picked up her linen napkin, lightly touched it to her lips, and turned her full attention toward Victor. She didn't look angry. She didn't look shocked. She looked entirely detached, like a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. And then she smiled. It was a quiet, cold expression that instantly shifted the power dynamic in the room. "Single?" she repeated, her voice remarkably calm. Victor chuckled, misinterpreting her composure as encouragement. "Yeah, available." He actually thought he was winning. Alina leaned forward, closing the physical gap between them. "I am not single," she said, her voice carrying a terrifyingly steady resonance that reached every corner of the room. "I am married to the man you spent the entire evening trying to diminish." The words hit the room with the force of a physical blow. Victor's smug grin vanished, frozen on his face like a grotesque mask. But she wasn't done. "And the fact that you felt secure enough to ask me that while sitting directly across from him," she continued, her gaze unwavering, "tells us everything we need to know about your character. It says absolutely nothing about my marriage." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The very colleagues who had been laughing at Victor's arrogant jokes moments ago suddenly found the patterns on their dinner plates fascinating. No one would look at him. Victor's face flushed a deep, angry red. He tried to laugh, a hollow, desperate sound. "Come on, it was just a joke." "No," Alina replied, her voice remaining perfectly level. "It wasn't a joke. And even if it were, no one is laughing." For the first time in his career, Victor Hale looked entirely powerless. The dinner ended abruptly after that. The drive home was quiet, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the quiet of a storm that had passed, leaving behind a completely altered landscape. The real shift, however, occurred the next morning. I arrived at the office expecting tense corridors and awkward whispers. Instead, my screen lit up with an urgent notification. Upper management had called an extraordinary meeting. It turns out someone at that table had decided they were no longer willing to tolerate Victor's toxicity. Every word spoken the night before had been documented and reported to the executive board. The corporate machinery moved with terrifying speed. Victor was not terminated. The board chose a far more humiliating punishment. They stripped him of his title, his private office, and his authority. He was publicly demoted to a secondary role, forced to report to the very people he used to look down on. The man who once demanded absolute obedience now walked the hallways with his head down, avoiding eye contact at all costs. His power was gone, shattered by a few quiet words over dinner. As for me, everything changed. People no longer looked at me as an expendable cog in Victor's machine. They saw someone who stood beside a force of nature. Sometimes silence is a shield. But on that night, I learned that a single, fearless voice can shatter even the most powerful illusion of control.